boys and girls, it's Miss Junks here again for another week of Read Alouds. And you're probably wondering why I have my little friend Curious George here with me today. Well, that is because we're going to be reading stories about Curious George, okay? And this week we're going to be learning about what is a setting. Last week we learned about characters, and this week we're going to be learning about the setting. So I'm going to set my little friend down over here, and I'm going to tell you what a setting is. A setting is where the story takes place. It could be at a castle, or maybe a farm, maybe at school, or at a park. So as we read our Curious George stories this week, we're going to be looking at where the settings of the stories are, okay? But before we begin, I want to introduce the author of Curious George. His name is H.A. Reyes, and he was an illustrator and a writer. He is best known for his Curious George series of children picture books that he and his wife, Margaret Ray, wrote together. So today, we're going to be listening to Curious George Goes to a Costume Party. And at the end, you're going to be able to tell me what the setting of the story is. I hope you enjoy.
Here's the chart for Margaret and H.A. Reyes and some of the books they have written. Curious George Goes to a Costume Party, written by Margaret and H.A. Reyes. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. One day, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, were on their way to a party at Mrs. Gray's house. George could not wait. He liked parties and he was looking forward to seeing Mrs. Gray. But when the door opened, George did not see Mrs. Gray at all. He saw a witch. "Don't be afraid, George," said the man with the yellow hat. "This witch is our friend." The witch took off her mask. It was Mrs. Gray after all. "Oh dear," she said. "Did I forget to tell you this was a costume party?" George had never been to a costume party before. Inside, he saw more people than he knew. They were all wearing costumes. There was his friend Betsy dressed up like an astronaut. And was that Bill? Why, he looked like a mummy. George wanted to wear a costume too. "I have some dress-up clothes upstairs," said Mrs. Gray. "Would you like to use them to make a costume, George?" Mrs. Gray took George to a room with a big trunk filled with clothes. "Borrow anything you like, George," she said. "I have just the thing for your friend downstairs." George tried on lots of costumes. The first was too big. The next was too small. Another one was too silly. And this one was too scary. At last, George found a costume that was just right. George was a rodeo cowboy. He wore a vest and pants with fringe. He even had a lasso and a hat. If only he could see himself in the mirror. George was curious. Could he see himself if he stood on the bed? No, he needed to jump higher. George bounced on the bed, just a little, but he still couldn't see. He bounced a little more and a little more. Soon, George was having so much fun he forgot all about looking in the mirror. He bounced as high as he could until... Crash! George bounced off the bed. He smashed into the night table and got tangled up in the tablecloth. Suddenly, everything went dark. George heard the people downstairs gasp. "What was that? Was that a ghost?" A ghost! George did not want to meet up with the ghost alone. He dashed out of the room and down the hall. He wanted to get back to his friend in a hurry, and he knew the fastest way. He hopped onto the stair rail and sailed, whoosh, down the stairs. "It is a ghost!" someone screamed. Everyone turned. They looked scared, and they were looking at George. The ghost must be right behind him. George flew off the rail and landed plop in the arms of the farmer. But this wasn't really a farmer. It was his friend, the man with the yellow hat. Soon, everyone stopped looking scared and started to laugh. "That's not a ghost. That's a cowboy," laughed a policeman. "That's not a cowboy, that's a monkey," giggled the princess. "That's not just any monkey," said Betsy. "It's Curious George." Everyone clapped and cheered. They liked George's Halloween trick. "You gave us a good scare, George," said Mrs. Gray, "and I'm glad to see you found some interesting costumes. Now, why don't I take your ghost outfit so you can join the party?" After the guests bobbed for apples, lit jack-o'-lanterns, and played some party games, prizes for the best costumes were handed out. There was one prize for Betsy, and one for Bill, and two for Curious George. "You were the best ghost and the best cowboy, George," said Mrs. Gray. Everyone had a good time at the party, especially George. Too soon it was time to say goodbye. "Good night, George. Happy Halloween."
So what did you guys think of Curious George Goes to a Costume Party? Isn't it so funny? I love this book. Curious George is so silly. Now let's talk about the setting. Remember, that is where the story takes place. Could you tell me the setting of this story? That's right. If you said he was at a party, a costume party to be exact, you are correct. Now for your activity today. You're going to go on Seesaw, watch a short video about settings, and then you're going to find a setting around your house and take a picture of it. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.